No alarm goes off in the Kalahari. There's no sound at all at first, just wind moving through dry grass and one woman's eyes opening on their own. Her body decided this, not a device. Somewhere behind her, embers shift under grey ash. A man she didn't wake nudges them back into flame. Nobody assigned him that task. It simply needed doing, and he was already awake to notice. A child crouches nearby, testing whether a beetle can climb a stick faster than it can fall off one. This is not a scheduled activity. It is simply what a 7-year-old does with an unsupervised hour. The woman sits up and asks herself one real question. What does today actually require? Maybe the nut grove nearby is finally ripe. Maybe nothing urgent exists at all, and today is for mending a torn strap instead. Nobody above her makes that call. An old man reshapes a stone edge nearby, unhurried, testing the weight in his palm between strikes. Someone hums, low, while braiding plant fibre into cord. None of this has a name like shift or task list. It is simply what a morning looks like when survival doesn't demand every hour of it. By midday, a small group walks out for roots and berries. Not a rotating crew, not a schedule anyone posted. Others stay back, resting in the shade, fixing tools, half listening to an argument about which direction the springbok moved. The day bends around whatever it actually needs, and nothing more. This was not a single lucky afternoon. For roughly 300,000 years, some version of this morning repeated at nearly every sunrise, on nearly every continent humans reached. No employer waited anywhere on Earth. Now hold that image next to your own Tuesday. An alarm cuts through sleep like a blade. You check messages before your feet touch the floor. Somewhere, a system already decided your next 9 hours belong to it, before you'd even decided to open your eyes. So here's the question that actually launched this investigation. If ancient humans had no jobs, no bosses, no shifts, how many hours did survival genuinely demand from them? A number has been circling the internet for years, repeated in videos exactly like this one. 15 hours a week. The rest, pure leisure. It sounds like proof, hard evidence that we built something tragically unnecessary. That number is real. It comes from somewhere specific, but researchers later found something almost everyone sharing it had missed. In 1968, anthropologist Richard Lee published fieldwork from the Dobe area of Botswana, tracking the Ju-Hwansi people's food-getting activity for months. Adults left camp to search for food only about 2.5 days a week, somewhere around 12 to 19 hours total. Economists seized on it. A hunter-gatherer utopia, apparently proven by data. Here's the catch almost nobody repeats. Lee's count captured the walking, the searching, the tracking. It didn't fully capture what happened once people got back to camp. Cracking nuts by hand, butchering meat, tanning hides, tending a fire for hours to cook a single meal. None of that showed up in the original 15. That wasn't even the strangest part of what came next. Anthropologists Kristen Hawkes and James O'Connell went back through the same records and added the processing labour back in. Their recalculation pushed total work time well past 40 hours a week, in line with a standard modern job. Lee himself acknowledged in his own later writing that the famous figure told only part of the story. So the 15-hour paradise wasn't quite an accounting error. It was an incomplete one. Researchers had counted the hunting and missed the cooking. And once you correct for that, a very different, very uncomfortable question opens up. If ancient humans worked nearly as many hours as we do, why does the idea of their life still feel like freedom, and ours still feel like a cage? The real surprise came much later, and it wasn't about hours at all. Return to that Ju-Hwansi morning by the fire. The woman deciding between the nut grove and her torn strap wasn't choosing between work and leisure. She was choosing what her own morning was for. Nobody tracked that decision on a schedule. Nobody would have docked her for choosing wrong. The labour was real. It just was never taken from her. This is the actual discovery hiding inside the corrected numbers. It was never really about working less. It was about who decided when and how that work happened. Anthropologist Frank Marlowe spent over a decade recording daily life among the Hadza of Tanzania, and his data revealed something strikingly consistent. Tasks didn't sit in separate boxes. Foraging blended into childcare. Childcare blended into storytelling by firelight. Nobody drew a line between on the clock and off. Now compare that to your own Monday commute. Your labour sits fenced off completely. A start time you didn't set, a location you didn't choose freely, a boundary drawn by someone who isn't you. That fence is the actual invention here, not the workload, the wall around it. And that fence has a birth date. About 10,000 years ago, in the Fertile Crescent, humans began deliberately planting grain instead of simply gathering what grew wild. Skeletal remains from the earliest farming settlements tell a harder story than the harvest myth suggests. Shorter stature than foraging populations before them, and more dental disease from grain-heavy diets. Farming could feed more people, but it also chained those people to fixed fields and a harvest calendar that nature controlled, not them. Once agricultural surplus let populations grow, something entirely new had room to appear. Specialists, toolmakers, people who watched the grain stores instead of gathering food themselves. Then, for what appears to be the first time in the archaeological record, someone whose job was simply to oversee everyone else's hours. That wasn't even the strangest discovery buried in the dirt. Archaeologists studying some of the earliest Mesopotamian clay tablets found something almost nobody expects. Humanity's oldest surviving writing isn't poetry. It isn't law or prayer or a declaration of love. Much of it is ration records, tallies of exactly how much grain each labourer was owed for a day's work. Some of civilization's first written words were, in effect, a timesheet. And yet, here's the twist the fenced labour story doesn't fully explain. Humans never stopped building things with zero survival value, even under those long farming hours. In 2004, archaeologist Christopher Henshelwood documented 41 deliberately pierced shell beads at Blombos Cave in South Africa, dated to roughly 75,000 years old. The nearest coastline sits about 20 kilometres away. Someone made that round trip, then drilled each shell by hand. For decoration, nobody's survival required. In 2008, Nicholas Conrad's team recovered a flute near Hohle Fels in Germany, carved from a vulture's hollow wing bone. Its 5 holes spaced with deliberate precision and radiocarbon dated to roughly 35,000 years old. Someone engineered pitch on purpose inside a freezing Ice Age cave for a sound with no nutritional value at all. Labour never disappeared. But labour and meaning were never fully separated either, until something learned to fence them apart. Even sleep followed this same unscheduled logic. Historian Roger E. Kirch combed centuries of pre-industrial court records, diaries and medical texts and found a strange, recurring pattern. People describing a first sleep, an hour or two awake in the dark, then a second sleep. Neuroscientist Thomas Weir later recreated the conditions experimentally. Volunteers deprived of artificial light for weeks began sliding into that same two-phase pattern on their own. Even unconsciousness, it turns out, wasn't always ruled by a clock. It was ruled by the body. So if it wasn't the hours that changed, what actually did? The ownership changed. Farming introduced fixed obligation to land. Cities introduced fixed employment to strangers. Somewhere across that long chain, humans stopped auditing their own time and started renting it out to someone else instead. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. This pattern didn't happen once. It happened independently on nearly every continent. Egypt, China, Mesoamerica, the Indus Valley, grain surplus, then hierarchy, then someone new who owned your hours. The same structure, invented separately, again and again, as if it were less a cultural choice than a trap built into surplus itself. No civilization seems to have found a way around it. That's the actual discrepancy this investigation uncovered. Not that ancient people worked less than we assume. In many weeks, once every hour of labour is honestly counted, they worked comparable totals, sometimes more. What they didn't lose was authorship over those hours. That's what let labour, rest and meaning braid into a single, unbroken day, instead of 3 fenced-off categories. There's one more twist, and it comes from inside the body itself. Anthropologist Herman Ponce measured daily energy expenditure among Hadza foragers directly, despite their far higher levels of walking and physical labour. The total calories burned barely differed from sedentary office workers in industrialised countries. Human metabolisms appear to quietly recalibrate to whatever physical demand surrounds them, within a fairly narrow range, which means the exhaustion so many people feel today probably isn't a fitness deficit at all. It's a mismatch between a mind built for self-directed days and a system engineered to never stop asking for more of them. In 2019, the World Health Organization formally classified burnout as an occupational phenomenon, not a personal failing, but a recognized response to chronic, unresolved workplace stress. A forager's body regularly faced hunger, weather, or sudden danger. It rarely faced this particular exhaustion, the slow erosion of showing up day after day, for years, inside hours someone else owns. Notice too what quietly replaced the harvest bell and the factory whistle. It's smaller now, it fits in a pocket. A notification pulls your attention back mid-thought, uninvited, at 11 p.m. on a Sunday, and some part of you still answers it like an overseer just called your name. No forager ever answered to a device. She answered to hunger, to weather, and to her own judgment, and to no one else's clock. So here is what this audit actually found, and it's worth sitting with. The first boss in human history wasn't a person standing over a field. It was a fence, an invisible line drawn between your labour and your life. First cut into the earth around a grain store 10,000 years ago, then rebuilt in every ledger, every shift bell, every timesheet since. Ancient humans never worked 15 hours a week. Some weeks, they worked more than you do right now. The difference was never the number on the clock. It's that no one had yet invented a way to own the clock itself. Someone eventually did. And it's still buzzing in your pocket, this instant, waiting for you to hand over the next hour, exactly the way it did last night, and the night before that, without ever once asking if the fire was yours to begin with.